Mental illness is at best a metaphor, a way of trying to describe, say, the elephant in the room. And the elephant in the room is not being able to function because of pain that I physically feel in my body, but that doesn't have a physical cause. And so it emanates from the way that I think and the way that I feel and the way that I behave, and that these patterns are neurological.
We look at it as you're a person first, who has a mental illness, not a mental illness who is also a person, if that makes any sense.
I've seen that when patients go to the hospital, they really don't come out better because they're really not doing anything for them in the hospital, but maybe giving them medication, and sometimes they're so doped up they don't know what's going on.
Sadly, from too many individuals, that can happen involuntarily.
I was with my dad in the Bryn. The Bryn is in Mid-Hudson. It's basically a sectioned off place of housing. Sort of looks like a basement. Only floodlights. It's 15 by 15 rooms with padded doors. And in there I felt sort of okay because my parents came to visit me every day, especially my mom, and I mean my dad, came when he could, and I was very grateful for that. And my mom had to leave one day, and my dad stayed with me, and he stayed with me the whole day, and we were being told that we would have to transfer to the nearest hospital because Mid-Hudson was full. They had no beds.
The treatment in a mental hospital is more intense. You're usually in there and you're meeting with doctors and meeting in group therapy frequently, daily.
So for acute care hospitalization, right, which is where you take a patient with a psychiatric illness who is in a crisis and put them onto a unit, basically the way that I like to look at it is in terms of safety and stabilization. Okay, so number one is to remove them from a crisis situation in the community, put them in a safe place, which is a unit under lock and key, where, structured, everyone is visible.
Individuals will have an opportunity to rest, for example, get sleep in basic medical care. There's also different forms of behavioral interventions that occur in those settings. Usually a mixture of group psychotherapy, also individual therapy, although that's usually catch as catch can within these situations.
Process of treatment is from the emergency room. We transport them up to the unit. They're started on the medications either that we start in the emergency or that they were on as outpatients. Either way, the admitting doctor will put those orders in, and primary psychiatrist will go and interview that patient and come up with a comprehensive treatment plan with social work therapy, recreational therapy, everybody involved, case management, and what we're going to do, because it's not all about biological therapies, right, the medication.
You take a medication like Seroquel, which is prescribed in a lot of situations. It very quickly brings about, or can, it depends on the individual, right? You always have to consider that everything is toxic. It just depends on the dose and the person.
Sometimes medications can make patients not feel like themselves, which can aggravate their existing issues if they feel foreign to themselves or if they feel like they're not themselves anymore.
I was being put into the ambulance. My dad took my book, because Dad I was reading, and he said, I'll meet you there. I'll drive behind you. And I got into the ambulance, and they had me in the bed there, and they started to drive away from Mid-Hudson. I closed my eyes for a bit. It was about an hour ride.
The research is pretty clear that there's not a one-to-one genetic transmission, and we fundamentally misapply population statistics to make claims about genetic inheritance. Genetic patterns do predispose people to certain patterns of behavior and thinking and feeling that end up being non-adaptive coping strategies. And so as part of an interaction effect with one's overall biological well-being and their psychological patterns of functioning and the world that they find themselves in, and the socioeconomic status of all of that all work together to produce these emergent kinds of lived realities or embodied experiences, sometimes functional, sometimes not so functional.
So there's actually a combination of factors that go into that hereditary, those genetic findings. Maybe you're predisposed in a broad way to being anxious, and that might ultimately manifest differently depending on the individual.
When you look at genetic studies, there does appear to be a genetic predisposition.
There are rules to be followed, and then there are people who have to keep you within those boundaries. There's the potential that the people in charge, the nurses, the orderlies, the doctors, the administrative staff.
There's a lot of research within mental health care now showing that about 8 to 10% of adult patients in mental health care will experience a worsening in their condition within the context of the therapy.
Quite a few studies that suggest that many people that go to the hospital find both at the same time that it is distressing, even traumatic, and at the same time helps them to stabilize symptoms that feel out of control that they're originally presenting for.
Some obstacles that I face dealing with clients with mental illness is just they're not wanting to cooperate or their inability to cooperate. Others is just them building a trust with case managers, because sometimes we rotate a lot and they get used to one and they just don't always want to open up to a new case manager.
Let's just say when somebody starts in an emergency room, right? And they're triaged over to the psychiatric area. From what I'm familiar with, we make that person change into a gown, we take all their personal effects, and we put them in a bed. Limited ability to kind of walk around, right? There's a security guard at the entrance point, and they're just there. For a lot of people, that's the first trauma, right? It's scary, especially if you're psychotic and paranoid, or just for anybody. I mean, how would any of us feel?
What I think we see that is definitely coercive and traumatic for patients is when forced treatments like putting them in restraints or putting them in an isolation room, that those kinds of experiences are absolutely traumatizing.
Hospitalization is the last resort. It is for people who are in crises and they're in danger. So for me, it's never the first line.
I hope our society gets to a point where taking care of your mental health is as daily as taking care of your physical health.
Probably one of the most powerful experiences was in that ambulance. I was looking straight out the back window and I saw all these cars following the ambulance. I didn't know which one was my dad's, but initially I just thought, well, wow, they're all free to live their lives right now. They can do whatever they want, and I can't. They all are going to places that they have to be and doing things that they have to do, and I have no choice about where I have to go. And when I got to the hospital, my dad couldn't come in. And that's when I broke down, because I knew he wouldn't be able to see me, and I wouldn't be able to see him.